At 12:01 a.m. on a Friday in September 2021, something happened on the internet that engineers at Spotify and YouTube had never quite seen before. A single music video, from a solo artist making her debut, generated more streams in its first 24 hours than almost any launch in K-pop history. Not the group, not a comeback, a debut. One song, one woman, standing alone on a stage for the very first time. Within hours, the servers were straining. The numbers didn't slow. They accelerated. By the time the sun rose over Seoul, her name was trending in 17 countries simultaneously. In Los Angeles, London, Paris, and Bangkok, people who had never once typed the words K-pop into a search bar were sharing the same video, watching the same woman move with a precision and charisma that felt almost architectural. Her name is Lalisa Manobin. The world knows her as Lisa. And over the last 10 years, through BLACKPINK's history-shattering rise and her own solo detonation, she has quietly assembled a collection of records that, laid end to end, don't look like the career of one artist. They look like the career of a generation. What you're about to hear isn't a fan tribute. It's an accounting, a reckoning. And by the end of it, you'll understand why the music industry had to rewrite some of its rules. Before we can talk about what Lisa broke, we have to understand what the ceiling looked like. When BLACKPINK took the Coachella stage in April 2019, they became the first Korean group and the first female K-pop act to headline one of music's most prestigious festivals. Not to perform, to headline. Rolling Stone ran the coverage. Vogue published the photos. The conversation shifted. These weren't pop stars playing in someone else's sandbox. They were reshaping where the sandbox was. But here's the thing about global disruption. It's rarely one event. It's a series of collisions that, in retrospect, look inevitable. BLACKPINK's trajectory since their debut in August 2016 had been relentless, YouTube records broken before they even released a full studio album, Billboard chart. Positions that analysts struggled to explain using existing frameworks. Streaming numbers that challenged the entire metric system Western music had been using for a decade. The group, Jisoo, Jennie, Rose, and Lisa, became the most subscribed music group on YouTube. Not the most subscribed K-pop group, the most subscribed music group in the world. To put that in perspective, they surpassed acts like Justin Bieber and Eminem on the platform, artists who had been building their subscriber base since YouTube was barely a decade old and had entire decades of catalog behind them. And yet, even within that extraordinary group, one member began to generate a category of records all her own. Lisa, the Thai-born dancer who left home at 14, trained for years in a system designed to break most of those who enter it, and then debuted in the most competitive music market on Earth, turned out to be something the industry hadn't quite prepared for. Not just a pop star, not just a K-pop idol. Something closer to a once-in-a-generation cultural transmission event. Here are the records that prove it. Yee, the records. Record first, the debut that rewrote the K-pop solo playbook. Before September 2021, the K-pop solo debut was a meaningful but bounded achievement. Groups dominated the genre, they always had, and solo launches from group members were treated as secondary events. Risky departures that occasionally worked and often underperformed relative to the group itself. The conventional wisdom held that solo artists needed an established run before their debuts could land at scale. Strong in Asia. Limited traction in the West. Gradual growth over weeks. The previous benchmarks for K-pop solo debut music video performance were significant within the genre's context, but modest compared to what a group launch could generate. Industry analysts expected even the biggest group members' solo debuts to follow a predictable curve. Then came September 10th, 2021. The moment Lalisa dropped. Within the first 24 hours, the music video accumulated over 73 million views on YouTube. A number so far outside the expected range that streaming analysts openly questioned whether the algorithm had a glitch. It didn't. The Lalisa MV set the record for the most viewed music video by a K-pop solo female artist in its first 24 hours. A record set not incrementally but explosively in a single day. On Spotify, the title track simultaneously broke records for single-day streams by a K-pop solo debut, with the album racking up millions of streams before most of the Western world had finished its first cup of coffee. To put that in perspective, Lalisa didn't just outperform other K-pop solos. It competed with comeback albums from established Western artists who had spent months building hype cycles. Lisa had no prior solo catalog, no prior solo singles, no warm-up period. She walked up to a starting line that had taken others years to reach, and simply cleared it. And that was just the beginning. Because the track Money, also from that album, was about to do something the music industry hadn't predicted at all. Record second, Money and the TikTok phenomenon. The conventional life cycle of a music release in 2021 ran approximately 4 to 6 weeks before streaming velocity slowed to a steady state. Songs either charted hard in the first week or they didn't. That was the model. Nobody told Money about the model. Initially released as an album track, not even the lead single, Money began quietly accumulating TikTok usage in the weeks after Lalisa dropped. Individual creators used it for choreography. Then more creators used it. Then the algorithm, doing what the algorithm does, began surfacing it relentlessly. Within months, the sound had become one of the most used audio tracks on TikTok globally, generating billions of video plays attached to its distinctive beat. What made this remarkable was the timeline. Money didn't chart aggressively on release. It built, slowly, organically, through user-generated content and viral choreography challenges, until it became one of the rare music industry cases of a non-lead album track outlasting its lead single in cultural durability. By 2022, Money had accumulated hundreds of millions of streams on Spotify alone, numbers that belong historically to flagship singles, not B-sides. To understand the magnitude, artists spend entire album campaigns trying to manufacture the kind of organic virality Money achieved without anyone at a label planning it. The equivalent would be a deep cut from a Taylor Swift album outstreaming the album's lead single, 6 months after release. And Lisa wasn't only setting records with her music. On Instagram, she was about to cross a threshold no K-pop artist had ever reached before. Record third, the 100 million Instagram follower milestone. Let's talk about real scale. There are approximately 8 billion people on this planet. Instagram has roughly 2 billion monthly active users. To accumulate 100 million followers on that platform means that 1 in every 20 Instagram users has actively chosen to follow a single account. Artists who reach that number belong to a very short list. Beyoncé, Rihanna, Ariana Grande, Selena Gomez. Lisa became the first K-pop artist, solo or group, to cross 100 million Instagram followers. The milestone, which she reached in 2022, wasn't just a social media statistic. It was a statement about cultural penetration, an artist from Thailand, performing in Korean, with a fan base spanning Southeast Asia, East Asia, Europe, and the Americas, had built a following that rivals, and in some cases surpasses, the most globally recognizable names in Western entertainment. As of her peak engagement periods, Lisa also ranked among the most engaged with accounts on Instagram globally, meaning her audience wasn't passive. They commented, they shared, they responded. By any metric, she wasn't just the most followed K-pop artist. She was one of the most genuinely engaged with public figures on the planet's largest photo-sharing platform. To put that in perspective, her follower count surpassed the entire population of France, Germany, or the United Kingdom, countries where her music was actively charting. The fashion industry, watching those numbers, had already made its move. Record fourth, Celine and the luxury brand Pivot. The K-pop idol has always been a marketing vehicle. That's not cynicism. It's business architecture. The idol system is built, in part, on aspirational identity and parasocial connection, and luxury brands had long understood this. Korean artists had been signing brand deals for years before Lisa came along. But Lisa's relationship with Celine, the historic Parisian fashion house, was different in kind, not just degree. In 2019, Lisa became Celine's global brand ambassador, a title that, at a house like Celine, carries weight far beyond endorsement. She wasn't a regional face or a digital spokesperson. She was positioned as a global ambassador for one of fashion's most respected institutions, sitting front row at Paris Fashion Week and appearing in international campaigns that ran in Vogue, Harper's Bazaar, and W magazine simultaneously. The commercial impact was measurable and immediate. In the hours after Lisa attended Celine runway shows and posted about the brand, the house's social media engagement would spike in ways that luxury analytics firms began tracking as a dedicated case study. The term Lisa effect entered marketing conversations, shorthand for the observable sales and engagement surge that followed her promotional activity. Alongside Celine, Lisa held simultaneous global ambassador positions with Bulgari and MAC Cosmetics, among others. The combined value of her brand portfolio placed her in a category that analysts described as historically unprecedented for a K-pop idol. Western pop stars typically secure one marquee luxury deal per career era. Lisa was running multiple marquee deals simultaneously, in multiple product categories, across multiple continents, as a solo artist who had not yet released a debut album. The most validated stage in the entertainment world, the award show floor, was about to deliver its own verdict. Record 5th, the MTV VMA moment. Award show. History is written slowly. A nomination here, a win there. The accumulation of institutional recognition across years. That's how it usually works. What happened at the 2022 MTV Video Music Awards broke that timeline. Lisa performed at the VMAs in August 2022 and became the first female K-pop solo artist to perform on that stage. Not to attend, to perform, to command one of American pop culture's most watched annual broadcasts with her own set in front of an audience of millions at a show that has historically crowned Western pop royalty. The performance drew critical attention from outlets that had not previously covered K-pop as a primary beat, reviewers at NME and Rolling Stone describing it as one of the night's most technically impressive sets. More than any specific award, it was the nature of the recognition, a Western institution, run by and for the Western music establishment, handing its stage to an artist from Thailand performing in a Korean-led genre. To put that in perspective, the VMAs have been running since 1984. In nearly 4 decades, the show's performance slots have been almost exclusively the domain of American and British acts. Lisa's set represented the first time a solo K-pop female artist occupied that space, and she occupied it without compromise, without an English-language crossover pivot, and without a Western co-headliner as a buffer. The records were mounting, but the most quietly staggering one, the one almost nobody talks about, was hiding in the choreography. Record Liu Fan Mu. The dance record. No one covers. Most people think of Lisa's dance records in terms of challenge virality or raw view counts. Those are real. The La Lisa choreography challenge generated hundreds of millions of TikTok views. The Money Dance became one of the most replicated sequences on the platform across 2021 and 2022. But the record worth examining isn't algorithmic. It's institutional. Lisa is widely cited by dance educators, choreography researchers, and performing arts institutions as having meaningfully accelerated the global integration of contemporary Korean dance vocabulary into Western training programs. The particular styles she represents, a high-precision fusion of street dance, hip-hop, and classical form, entered university performing arts curricula, competitive dance circuits, and professional studio repertoire in markets from the US to the UK to Brazil, with her work frequently cited as the primary reference point. Before K-pop's Western breakthrough moment, contemporary dance in Europe and North America rarely incorporated Korean pop choreographic structures as primary teaching material. Lisa's visibility, at Coachella, at the VMAs across billions of YouTube views, accelerated that integration faster than any institutional effort could have engineered deliberately. She didn't just perform, she distributed a movement language, and her reach extended well beyond dance studios. Because on the live concert circuit, the numbers were just as staggering. Record 7th, the Born Pink World Tour and what it proved. The argument used to be that K-pop could win the internet, but couldn't fill Western arenas. The theory, held largely by legacy music industry figures who'd watched streaming statistics without buying tickets, was that the passionate but digitally concentrated fan base wouldn't translate to bodies and seats, especially in markets where K-pop remained culturally niche. BLACKPINK's Born Pink World Tour, which ran from 2022 into 2023, demolished that argument in the most literal way possible. The tour became the highest-grossing concert tour ever by a K-pop act, with total gross revenue reported at over $400 million globally. Sold-out dates included Wembley Stadium in London, Madison Square Garden in New York, and major arenas across Europe, Australia, and Southeast Asia. In multiple cities, additional dates were added within hours of the first dates selling out. Lisa, as both a core performer and the group's primary choreographic engine for major concert segments, was central to a production that industry veterans compared, in terms of scale and technical ambition, to the touring apparatus of Beyoncé or U2. To put that in perspective, $400 million in gross revenue places Born Pink alongside the world's highest-grossing tours in any year, by any act, not just K-pop. The tour didn't just validate K-pop's commercial viability in the West. It permanently retired the assumption that K-pop couldn't fill rooms. And then Lisa did something no one in her position had done quite so decisively before. She stepped fully onto a Spotify stage of her own. Record 8th, the Spotify monthly listener peak. Here is a number worth sitting with. At her peak, Lisa accumulated over 20 million monthly listeners on Spotify, a platform where the average major label artist would celebrate crossing 5 million. To understand what that means, Spotify's monthly listener metric doesn't count existing fans hitting repeat. It counts unique individuals who stream your music in a rolling 30-day window. It is arguably the cleanest measure of real-time cultural reach in the streaming era, and it's ruthlessly honest. You can't manufacture it. At over 20 million monthly listeners, Lisa ranked not just as the most streamed K-pop solo artist in Spotify's history, but among the most streamed Asian artists of any genre, ever. She consistently outperformed major Western pop acts who had been on the platform since its earliest years and had entire decade-long catalog backlogs pulling listeners their way. What made this more striking? Lisa achieved these numbers with a relatively small solo catalog, primarily the Lalisa album and its associated singles. Other artists with comparable listener counts had discographies spanning 10 or 15 years of output. Lisa was drawing numbers that matched peak Western artist performance off the equivalent of a debut EP. That ratio, catalog size relative to audience reach, is the kind of efficiency metric that makes A&R departments stare at spreadsheets and blink. But there's one record on this list we haven't covered yet. And honestly, it's the one that reframes how you think about all the others. Record 9th, the outsider who became the standard. This one isn't tracked by Spotify or YouTube. No chart measures it. But it may be the most durable achievement on this list. Lisa entered the YG Entertainment training system in 2011, at 14 years old, 4,000 kilometers from home, in a country whose language she did not speak. She was the only foreigner in her trainee class. In YG's training structure, notoriously competitive, with continuous evaluation and departure common for even talented trainees, she was, on paper, the person least likely to debut. She trained for 5 years. In those 5 years, she achieved fluency in Korean through pure immersion. She became the primary dancer in a cohort full of professional-grade performers. And when BLACKPINK debuted in August 2016, she was, according to accounts from the group's own members, the in-house benchmark, the one they measured themselves against in the practice room. That is the record no chart captures, the girl who arrived from the outside and became the internal standard, in a system built for Korean artists, in a country that wasn't hers, performing in a language she had to learn from scratch. That origin story isn't biography. It's infrastructure for everything else on this list. Record 10th, the Billboard Hot 100 breakthrough. The Billboard Hot 100 is, for better or worse, the gravitational center of the American music industry. It has been since 1958. Artists who crack it have access to the most powerful commercial real estate in the most lucrative music market on Earth. For K-pop solo artists, particularly female ones, the chart had been essentially a closed door. Groups had found ways in, but the solo female K-pop artist charting on the Hot 100 was, for years, a statistical rarity so extreme it barely registered as a category. Lalisa changed that. Upon its release, it charted on the Billboard Hot 100, making Lisa one of the highest-charting solo female K-pop artists in the chart's history at that point. The achievement arrived with no English-language lyrics, no Western feature artist, and no radio airplay strategy built around mainstream US formats. It was a song performed primarily in Korean, by a Thai artist, charting on America's flagship singles chart through raw streaming and purchase data. To put that in perspective, the Hot 100 is driven by a combination of airplay, streams, and digital sales. For a non-English track to crack it requires not just a dedicated fan base, but genuine crossover cultural penetration. Listeners who don't share the artist's primary language or cultural context choosing to stream and purchase. Lalisa cleared that bar without asking for permission, without a crossover pivot, and without compromising a single element of what made it distinctively, entirely hers. Which is, in the end, a fairly accurate summary of what Lisa has done her entire career. 2. The bigger picture. Step back from the numbers for a moment. What does this actually mean? Music industry analysts, writers at Billboard, researchers at MRC Data, cultural commentators at publications like The Atlantic and The Guardian, have spent the last decade trying to explain K-pop's Western rise using existing frameworks. They reached for globalization language, for streaming platform democratization arguments, for theories about social media infrastructure and parasocial connection. What Lisa's career suggests is that those frameworks, while useful, miss something essential. The assumption that Western audiences require Western cultural reference points, English lyrics, Western-style production, familiar faces from familiar backgrounds, turned out to be demonstrably wrong. Lisa became one of the most streamed, most followed, most commercially valuable artists on the planet while operating entirely outside that assumption. She didn't cross over to Western taste. Western taste crossed over to her. What that means for the next generation of artists from Thailand, Indonesia, Vietnam, Brazil, Nigeria, countries historically told their music didn't have Western export potential, is significant and still unfolding. Lisa demonstrated that the path to global superstardom doesn't run exclusively through Nashville, London, or Los Angeles. It runs through competence, charisma, and the kind of cultural authenticity that doesn't compromise itself to meet an assumed audience expectation. So here's the question worth sitting with. If Lisa could do this, from Thailand through Korea to the world, who's next? And are the institutions that control access to global music platforms actually ready for what comes with that answer? 3. Emotional peak, personal moment. Before the records. Before the Spotify charts and the Instagram milestones and the luxury brand contracts and the stadium tours, there was a 14-year-old girl on a flight from Bangkok to Seoul. She didn't speak Korean. She had never lived away from her family. She had been accepted into a training program where, statistically, the majority of trainees would not debut, where years of practice and personal cost would not guarantee anything. In interviews across the years, Lisa has spoken, carefully with the measured language of someone who has learned to be precise about difficult things, about the loneliness of those early years, about learning a language through immersion, which is to say through confusion and humiliation and gradual hard-won breakthrough, about being the only person in her trainee class who looked like her, who came from where she came from, who had built her entire sense of self in a cultural context that didn't map onto where she had arrived. She has described watching Korean television obsessively to absorb the language, studying her trainee peers not just for dance technique, but for the unspoken social codes she hadn't grown up with, finding a way to be simultaneously excellent enough to stay and composed enough not to let the cost of that excellence show. That composure is worth naming, because it's easy to see the records and forget the person who carried them. The records are numbers. What Lisa represents, if you look at the full arc without the highlight reel compression, is the story of someone handed every structural reason to fail. Wrong nationality, wrong language, wrong background for the industry she was entering, and who proceeded to treat those reasons as genuinely irrelevant, not as obstacles to overcome with some triumphant narrative arc. Just irrelevant. She kept training, kept showing up, kept working in conditions most people will never face, toward a goal most people would have stopped believing in. The records, eventually, followed. There's a version of this story that renders her as exceptional and lets everyone else off the hook. But the more honest reading is that she was exceptionally prepared, in a system that forced preparation, with a discipline that is the product of choice, repeatedly made over years. That's the part the charts can't tell you. And it's the part that makes all the charts mean something. Remember how we started? September 2021. Midnight. A debut that outpaced nearly everything before it. Servers straining. Numbers accelerating. A name trending in 17 countries simultaneously. Here's what that moment was actually announcing. It was the arrival of a career that had been a decade in construction. And that career, compressed into a list, looks like this. The most viewed K-pop solo female debut music video in 24 hours. The most streamed K-pop solo artist in Spotify's history. The first K-pop artist to cross 100 million Instagram followers. A performance at the MTV VMAs. The first solo female K-pop artist to ever own that stage. A luxury brand portfolio, including Celine and Bulgari, that redefined what a K-pop artist's commercial footprint could look like. A role at the center of the highest-grossing K-pop concert tour in history. A Billboard Hot 100 charting track that didn't ask for a single word of English. And underneath all of it, a training story that began 4,000 kilometers from home, at 14 years old, and ended with the girl who came from outside becoming the standard everyone measured themselves against. 10 years. One artist. A list of records that, if you read them cold without knowing who set them, you'd swear belong to 5 different people across 5 different decades. Here's what I want to know, and I genuinely want you to drop this in the comments. Which record on this list surprises you most? Because the answer tends to split pretty cleanly between people who followed Lisa for years and people who are just finding out about her now. Both answers are interesting. Whatever you decide, the next time someone tells you the music industry already knows what global stardom is supposed to look like, point them to this list. BLACKPINK turns 10. Lisa's records don't look like they're planning to stop. If you want to understand how the next decade of global music gets shaped, and by whom, now you know exactly where to start looking.